On behalf of the trustees, faculty of the Robert E. Weber Institute for Worship Studies, I welcome our guest preacher for this evening. IWS professor Dr. Dinelle Frankland is the academic dean at IWS and professor of the first master's course of Biblical Theology of Worship. Dr. Frankland is professor of worship studies at Lincoln Christian Seminary in Lincoln, Illinois, where she has worked since 2003. She also has served as academic dean at LCS from 2011 to 2015. Dr. Frankland holds a Bachelor of Sacred Music degree from Lincoln Christian University, a Master of Music and Church Music from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and a doctorate of Worship Studies from the Robert E. Weber Institute for Worship Studies. She previously taught music and worship at Dallas Christian College and Ozark Christian College, and has regularly taught at the TCMI Institute, a seminary near Vienna, Austria. She's the author of His Story, Our Response, What the Bible Says About Worship. And she travels throughout the U.S. as a speaker and a worship leader. She enjoys reading, movies, and visiting what she used to describe as her extremely cute nephews and nieces, but they grew up, so I guess they've lost their cuteness. Is that right? They're not cute anymore. Okay. It is an honor to welcome Dr. Frankland to the pulpit of the Robert E. Weber Institute for Worship Studies.
They're not cute, but I'm going to live with them when I'm old. So, in 2008, a golfer by the name of J.P. Hayes was disqualified from a tournament for using what was an illegal golf ball. Now, I don't know anything about golf, but apparently in golf, using the wrong ball is a real thing. The striking thing about this is not that it was a bad disqualification. It's that the only person who knew that J.P. Hayes used an illegal ball was J.P. Hayes. He discovered it when he got back to his hotel room that night and was cleaning out his golf bag, and he turned himself in. Later, he would say that he would not have been able to live with himself if he had lived with that deception. He lost his PGA standing for a year, but he kept his integrity. Sometimes a defeat is really a victory. Now, we all know from our Sunday school flannel graph lessons, or whatever you crazy kids use these days, about biblical characters who on the surface look like they are about to be defeated. Moses could not speak for himself until God provided his brother to be his voice. David, a shepherd boy, killed a giant with a slingshot. Esther put her life on the line for such a time as this. Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho, not with an army, but with a worship band. And Joseph was sold into slavery by his very own brothers. Years later, when he met them again, he said, "What you intended for evil, God intended for good." Sometimes a defeat is really a victory. The Apostle Paul knew about these heroes and heroines of the faith, of course. But at the time of the writing of the Corinthians letters, he might have been feeling defeated. Now, we're all good worship students, so we know the culture of Corinth. We know the idol worship that was prominent there. We know they had their own little worship war in 1 Corinthians. We see them as the poster children for divisiveness in the church. If that's not enough, in the second letter, Paul is dealing from people from without who have infiltrated the church and their leadership. These men are braggarts and show-offs. Paul sarcastically calls them the super apostles, which on a side note would make a fine comic book character. Alan Rath, and a cape. So if anybody wants to work on that, but don't think about that for the next 10 minutes. These Corinthians were attracted to the outwardly attractive, to rhetoric, to intellect, to beauty, to athleticism. And Paul was none of these things. Oh, he could write well enough, they said, but he couldn't speak very well. He was short. He was unkind and not wise. And of all things, he didn't even take any money for his ministry. How good could he be? He was simply not good enough for them. We know that Paul was not prone to boasting. God had warned Jeremiah about such things. Do not let the wise man boast in his wisdom, or the strong man boast in his strength, or the rich man boast in his riches. Rather, let him boast in this, that he knows and understands me. This is the Paul that we know, the humble apostle. I want to know Christ. But in these chapters in 2 Corinthians, Paul is getting fed up with his apostleship being questioned. And he sets out to set the record straight. In chapter 11, he outlines his sufferings for the sake of the gospel. And at the beginning of chapter 12, which was so beautifully read for us, he tells this crazy story about a man who had been taken up into the heavens, and he had seen unimaginable things. He can't describe them to you, these things, incredible things. The man, of course, is Paul. This is a secret that he kept for 14 years, a secret that would have elevated him in the eyes of these men who cared about that kind of spiritual experience. So in these 2 or 3 chapters, what Paul seems to be saying to his detractors, and this is my paraphrase from the Greek, na 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 na. You want wisdom? I am wise. You want credentials? I have credentials. Do you want visions? I've had visions. You want a Jew? I am a Jew. And so you're kind of getting into the hang of it, and you're kind of cheering for Paul, and you're going, you go, Paul, you get him, you got him back in the corner, now you throw the knockout punch, and Paul says, I am not going to boast about any of these things. Wait, what? Paul says, I'm going to step away. Not only that, but he changes the criteria by which the game is being played. Sometimes a defeat is really a victory. My only legitimate claim to boasting, Paul says, is not in these outward forms of strength and power, but in weakness. The weakness that Paul describes is so familiar to us that it has become a cliche. Maybe some of you have called your professor your thorn in the flesh. From a different school, a different professor. But this is no cliche. This man who had been shipwrecked, who had been beaten, who had been in prison, who had known hunger and thirst and want. This man is so afflicted by this thorn that it has caused him great pain and anguish. And he cries out to God to take it away. It's only after he asks 3 times, and only after God says no, that Paul admits, as was beautifully read, this is a gift. Discerning students want to know, is it a gift from God or is it a gift from Satan? The answer is probably yes. The action here is God's. God gave me. But we learn from God's servant Job that God allows Satan to afflict his children to a certain extent. But Paul is not asking that question. Paul's take on the matter is this is a gift because it is keeping him from becoming prideful like his Corinthian rivals. His humiliation ensures his humility. And we don't like this. Not in our faster, stronger, higher world. Nobody likes to lose. Nobody likes to relinquish power. And if we do, we are quick to hide it so that we are not vulnerable with other people. And so Paul introduces into our culture and that of the Corinthians what is perhaps the biggest biblical paradox. When I am weak, then I am strong. Amen. How does this work? Maybe Paul is saying that the strength was there all along, but it took the weakness to bring it out. Maybe he's saying that he recognizes his own weakness and therefore searches for God's strength. Maybe he's saying that the weakness is a prerequisite to the strength. Maybe they should have got one of those New Testament scholars to preach this sermon. Because I don't know. What I do know is that to Paul, it doesn't matter. Because what Paul recognizes here is the only way for his ministry to go forward, and I think that's what this is about, is for Paul to give the weakness and God to give the power. That power is the same power that created the heavens and the earth. It is the same power that killed a giant with a slingshot. It is the same power that toppled the walls of Jericho. It is the same power that raised Jesus Christ from the dead, and it is the same power that is in you by and through the work of the Holy Spirit. And there is no weakness that can stand up to that much power. Now, you're a thorn in the flesh. I'm talking to the students here because y'all are fine. Okay. Your thorn in the flesh is not that paper that was due Holy Week, right? It's not the guitar player who could never seem to, I don't know why I'm looking at you guys. It's not the guitar player who could never seem to play in tune. Not the choir member who is never on time. It's not that nice little lady who puts notes in the offering plate. We didn't sing enough hymns today. It's not, and we can vote on this, Kate Turabian. So, you may say that your thorn in the flesh, of course, is something deeper than that. It might be a debilitating, chronic illness. It might be depression. It might be an addiction of many kinds. It might be the people in your church who really are trying to cause harm to your community. It might be a learning disability. It might be grief over the death of a loved one, of a friend, of a mentor. Grief over the loss of a job, the loss of a dream. I don't know any more about your thorn than I do about Paul's. And so you say, I just can't do it. I can't turn in another paper. I can't read another book. I can't grade another paper. I can't balance my life, my family, my ministry, my schooling. I can't keep going. I can't have this conversation one more time with my preacher that the gospel is the center of worship, not the sermon. I can't get my church into the 21st century, or for that matter, back to the 3rd. I can't keep doing this. If the paradox is strength out of weakness, the mystery is the sufficiency of God's grace. God's power is manifested not by taking the thorn away from us, but by bringing us through it. Sufficiency means that we are content in living in the light of the work of Jesus Christ in our lives. And the self-sufficient have no need of God. Near the end of C.S. Lewis's Prince Caspian, Peter brings Caspian before Aslan, and Caspian falls at the feet of the great lion and kisses his paw. Aslan says, "Welcome, Prince. Do you feel yourself sufficient to take up the kingship of Narnia?" Caspian said, I don't think so, sir. I'm just a kid." And Aslan replies, "Good. Had you felt yourself sufficient, it would have been proof that you are not. Your thorn in the flesh, your weakness, is not that little annoyance that happens to all of us every day. It may be one of those chronic, debilitating issues that you and God deal with on a daily basis. But my friends, I can tell you exactly what weakness looks like. See, from his head, his hands, his feet, sorrow and love pour mingled down. Did e'er such love and sorrow meet, or thorns compose so rich a crown? Weakness, in the eyes of the world, is God hanging on a cross, beaten, bruised, bleeding, dying. You say you can't do it anymore? Can't stand up to the enemy? Can't fulfill the ministry that God has called you to? Then look to the cross. Because sometimes a defeat is really